He spent a fortune on the trip. He was a squire about town.
Paul, some guests coming today. With the shop looking pristine. Come on.
Yes, sir.
His first duty, though, was to pep up his hat. He obviously lagged behind London fashion, for it required 2 shillings 6pence worth of silver lace and 2 shillings for labour to marry it to his wig.
Splendid. Splendid. Yeah. Yes, wonderful. Wonderful.
The mercer was kept in good business with the wedding clothes.
Oh, what do you think? Oh, love. Oh, gorgeous. Yes. No, I'm not sure. Perhaps. Yeah. So, if we have that around like so. Oh yes. Oh yes.
Over 5 yards of cloth at 18 shillings per yard, 16 yards of durance for lining at 1 3pence, 3 3/4 ounces of silver thread for buttonholes at 6 shillings per ounce. Then there were the silver buttons, 3 1/2 dozen at 7 shillings and 6pence per dozen, and 5 silver breast buttons at 2 shillings. There were lots of extras. Chamois pockets and puffs for ye breeches, and scarlet stockings at 10 shillings.
Oh, splendid.
The tailor cost £1 15 shillings labour on the wedding suit, and the outfits for the 2 grooms cost another £9 3 shillings and 5pence. In his excitement, he almost forgot to buy presents for the bride, but now he might have to cut corners a little. While his own wedding ring cost £1 and 5 shillings, he could only manage 14 shillings for a false diamond ring. A false diamond necklace was a good buy at £1 1 shilling and 6pence. And he could throw in half a dozen coffee spoons at 18 shillings. Gilt, of course, not gold. 20 years later, he was to lavish over £177 on kitting out his 2 daughters. And so he stepped out into town, a person of quality and fortune. Now Mr. Blundell was still not out of the woods, for there was still a lot of last-minute bargaining to be done. Nicholas wanted the whole £2,000 in a lump sum, but settled for slightly less, with some provisions for Frances, should she be left a widow. Grandmother Webb entered into the rejoicings by granting £1,000 to her granddaughter in her will. Marriage for Catholics was a complicated and clandestine affair. Most important of all was the secret Catholic service before a priest. Discretion mattered, as an informer could claim £100. Even the bridegroom did not find out the exact date until the night before. He records the event almost nonchalantly in his diary. June the 17th, I was married to Lord Langdale's daughter by Mr. Slaughter, a clergyman. The legal ceremony at the local parish church followed soon afterwards. Here the bells rang out at a cost of 5 shillings to announce that Nicholas Blundell, Squire of Little Crosby, had found a bride. The young squire returned to Crosby with his fashionable bride, and he was to enjoy 35 years of relative peace. Although still technically recusants, the Blundells were left in peace, apart from a flurry of activity at the time of the Jacobite uprising in 1715. Nicholas Blundell was obviously keen to keep himself to himself. His wife Frances was pretty, if somewhat haughty and demanding, and extravagant. Yet with £2,000 in the funds, who could complain? In the midst of all this domestic bliss, it was discovered that Frances would, at last, present Nicholas with a successor. There was great excitement in the family, with the proud father dashing off to buy baby clothes and a cradle, relatives and friends dropping in, and expensive maternity clothes being ordered by post from London. It is a pity that toothache could not be cured by mail order, for Frances begged to be allowed to ride to Liverpool to have the offending tooth drawn. She was refused. Nicholas was not going to take any risks. Toothache was not life-threatening. Nearly 4 months later, he brought Mr. Gilders from Liverpool to cure her malaise. Fee, 1 shilling. On September the 20th, Nicholas recorded that his wife began to feel ye pains of labour, while he stoically continued to break flax. 2 days later, his first child, Mary, was born. Nicholas put on a brave face. After all, he was one of 14 children. There was to be no son and heir, only another daughter, Frances. Nicholas accepted this as the will of God. Despite his inward disappointment, these children, particularly Mary, were to become his almost constant companions until they were old enough to go abroad to school. There were always trips to local fairs at Liverpool, Formby and at Great Crosby, skating on the ice in winter and bathing in the nearby sea in summer. Meanwhile, his wife was organising the domestic staff, usually falling out with them, visiting friends near and far afield, or travelling to St Winifred's Well across the Mersey at Holywell in Flintshire, no doubt hoping that water and prayer would increase her fertility. Nicholas busied himself in his gardens, collecting seeds and cuttings from any source possible, creating a knot garden into which he transplanted his favourite wildflowers, experimenting with the then rare and expensive tulips, 4 shillings each, and planting narcissus and gillyflowers. The sandy soil was also ideal for asparagus, which was a delicacy in the house. He also planted avenues of Spanish chestnuts, Scotch firs, and sowed hundreds of holly berries, acorns, fir seeds and haws to provide much needed timber for the future. Throughout his lifetime, recusants were still debarred from the political and official life of the country, but the Catholic gentry were very much appreciated socially and aesthetically. Like Nicholas Blundell, they had usually been educated abroad and were often seen as more civilised and erudite than their fellow countrymen who had suffered the cruel and Spartan English public schools. Girls in particular, who were often sent to convents abroad, had the absolute advantage over their non-Catholic counterparts who were normally kept at home. Mr. Blundell was a popular and kindly figure in the area, not only tending the lands with great care, but lavishing generous love and attention on his neighbours, friends and tenants. These liaisons were not narrowly bounded by his faith either. Despite the fact that his whole village was populated by Catholics, he made easy and genuine friends with all and sundry, including Parson Letus of Sefton and Parson Gerard Waring, the headmaster of Merchant Taylor's School in Crosby. They agreed to agree and agreed to disagree, but always with goodwill. It perhaps came as no shock to him to discover that in 1714 he went to Sefton to ye parish meeting, but all business was over, and found ye parish had chosen me to be their church warden. Yet he was no doubt a little alarmed at the legal and moral implications as he sped off to Chester to consult a lawyer friend. On his return, however, with his conscience quietened, he launched himself into his new role with great aplomb. Young Mally was usually keen to join her father on his business trips. April 21st. I met Thomas Sire at Sefton. 'Tis the first time we met to consult of ye parish affairs since we were church wardens. We caused the chest to be brock open as had not been opened of many years.
If we compare it with
We looked to see in what repair ye leads were in ye windows.
The leads were all better. The stonework generally.
There was obviously much urgent work to be done. Nicholas arranged for the church roof to be repaired. He brought in John Melling to mend ye bell wheel and decided to reconstruct ye stairs for ye pulpit.
They're a lot more solid than they were before.
February 20th. Thomas Squire was here. I showed him ye table of fees I had drawn up, and ye orders as I intended to propose for the good of the parish. Sefton Church was the hub of the community, and a paradise for local children, with all its nooks and crannies. There was also time for moments of quiet reflection. Nicholas was genuinely fond of children, and often amused by them. We went to Nick Johnson's, where we saw Will Tarleton's son, a boy not 4 years of age, smoke a good part of a pipe of tobacco, I think about ye quantity of half a pipe, and when I asked him whether he would rather have a pipe of tobacco or a butter kale, he answered, tobacco. He went to great lengths to carry out his duties as church warden. He was determined to preserve and even beautify the church of his ancestors. The church was there to welcome the faithful into this world and ease their departure into the next. He gave elaborate instructions for the building of a parish hearse so that all, rich and poor, could make their final journey to church with dignity. He was a much-loved and highly effective church warden. On leaving office he writes, April 19th. Thomas Squire and I delivered up our account as church wardens. They were read in the church, and several stints were set for the better regulating the affairs of the parish. There was present Parson Waring, Thomas Bradley, etc. I gave Parson Leeters £5 towards the augmentation of ye parish stock. In 1716, Nicholas Blundell decided to send his 2 daughters to school abroad in Ghent. This was illegal. He and his wife accompanied them, returning to London on the 3rd of August on the Betty yacht. The lax customs officers failed to notice their missing daughters. It was just as well. In London, Nicholas took the opportunity to visit Newgate Prison to see his cousin and friend, Mr. Scarisbrick of Scarisbrick. He also met Mr. Blackburn, who had already spent 21 years in jail for the bogus plot to assassinate William III in 1694. Unbeknown to Nicholas, Mr. Blackburn was to spend another 30 years in the filth of Newgate. He died still awaiting trial.